being in a room with somebody, being in a room with an opera singer or a person doing speaking is a little bit different than when things are reproduced. Speakers sound like speakers. Speakers does not really sound like the natural thing. And you could ask yourself, what is it that creates the signature of a speaker? Why does it not sound exactly like the voice it portrays? When Lars and I started working with speakers, we have always chased to get away from the noise. How do we create something that has significantly less noise so that we can get closer to the performance of the artist? We try to chase efficiency and push efficiency up by adding more flux, more iron to the driver, but only to get worse results. Maybe it plays louder, but it sounds more like a speaker. And that is sort of like the opposite of what we really wanted. It seems like every time we did something to increase sensitivity of the systems, we got less music. And over time we had a notion that this was maybe, iron was maybe to blame in that. Now in most speaker drivers, iron is used to conduct the flux so that you with one magnet can create a quite narrow gap where the voice coil is placed. So you have iron inside and outside of the voice coil. And that creates a concentration of flux with the current in the voice coil, creates a force that moves the speaker coil. And when you have iron, you have the problem that iron is pushed up with the permanent magnet to almost saturation. And that means that in one direction you cannot push it any further, or not much further at least. It can only accept so much flux, so when you push and push and push, you get the flux up to a certain degree, but then even if you push harder, you will not get above that level. So you have a saturated situation where the iron cannot accept any more flux, but when the sum is negative, and this flux from the magnet, from the electromagnet here, is negative compared to the DC flux, you can easily lower the flux. And that built-in dynamic nonlinearity is really what makes speakers sound like speakers rather than the talk or the music or the violin played directly in front of you. So we asked ourselves, is it possible to simply design the iron out? So we can create a driver which is as efficient as a speaker employing iron, but without this negative effects, this iron distortion elements that you get from having iron in a close to saturated state. We started the drivers with rings from copper, and the reason we started with the copper rings in the pole piece was copper was a very good heat conductor. But copper also has this firm element of hysteresis, and hysteresis is a mechanism where a block of metal resists magnetic change. So sort of like the dynamic footing is less firm because you have this variation of flux. But because we use rings of copper or silver in the drivers, that variation is only 1/10 of the variations you see in normal drivers. So the resulting inductance of the voice coil here is only 1/10 of what it normally would be. And if you go to the silver version that has higher conductivity, it's even lower. It's only 1/12, so you're down to 8% of the induction and thus the magnetic variation. When we employed copper rings in the magnet gap, we also employed elements that combats or fights magnetic flux variation. And we see this here, we have no problem, they move completely free. But when we try to push this ring down on top of the flux, we see that it doesn't fall, it simply floats. And that is because the flux change you get in the ring, in the pole ring, combats the change and try to prevent the change from happening. And that's what makes these drivers sound far less like speaker drivers and much more like natural music. Now, if this copper had been a superconductor and had absolutely no resistance, it would resist magnetic flux change so much it will not float, it will just stay floating. It will not even fall 1 millimeter. So the idea of looking at this and going to something with even higher conductivity than copper was very straightforward. And that was the reason why Lars and I decided to step into having silver as pole rings rather than copper. Because silver is an even better electrical conductor than copper. Silver is the best we have, unless you go into superconductors, which is not feasible at the moment because you need cryogenic temperature to maintain superconductivity.